Welcome to Cup the Bull, an insightful podcast which addresses the news of the day and the cultural issues plaguing our society, bringing logic and context to these topics and discussing solutions too real for mainstream pundits. Now, here are your hosts, Charles Love, Shemeka Michelle, and Wilfred Riley.
Welcome to Cut the Bull. Thanks for joining us this week. I am Charles Love with my co-host Shemeka Michelle. And our guest this week is John McWhorter, prolific writer, author, Columbia University professor, 1776 Unite scholar, and author at Substack. John, welcome for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to get into the topic. I think it's interesting what I wanted to talk to you about. But first, I think we have to get into the latest of the social media storms and debates, and that is the Juneteenth holiday. That is new, that, was pushed through tremendously fast. I was shocked by how quickly it was signed by the president. And there was a weird reaction on social media and on Twitter from all your blue checks and everybody getting all over the place. And I want to get your take on it, because I won't say the size, because I kind of bristle when I hear that, because I think that there are more than two. But there was definitely camps that this kind of went into. So, Shemeka, I saw a tweet of yours first. So let's start with you. What do you think of the reaction to the Juneteenth holiday?
I think I was surprised by the reaction, especially since last year President Trump said that this was something that he wanted to do, and I did not see all of the pushback that I'm seeing now with, people saying, oh, it's divisive, or, this is going to push division. I'm shocked because I didn't hear that when he initially said it. So I'm just trying to figure out, were you for it then and something has changed, or were you just for it because you felt like it was going to help President Trump get the black vote? So it seems a little now, like it's not genuine. Your reaction then wasn't genuine, because now you're all up in arms and so angry about it. And for me, of course, it's not going to really do anything for the black community. In my opinion, it's just, it's kind of like a pacifier to just, shut people up. I don't really think it's any substance to it. And so for me, I feel like this would have been a good way for Republicans to say, okay, that's great. Trump was going to do that, but what else do you have? Like, I felt like they could have really used this to their advantage to, call the Democrats to the carpet, to say, okay, what else you got? Because for me, it's not really a division. I don't necessarily celebrate it. I don't have a reason that I don't. I'm just not a very social person. And a lot of times it's something big in our community that I just don't go to. I do the 4th of July because that's what my family has always done. And my grandmother would kill me, at 87 years old if I didn't do something for the 4th of July. So I choose that. But as far as the reaction, I was just surprised that it's, such a big fight. Even Charlie Kirk last year supported it. And then this year, his tweets are totally different. And it's like, okay, Charlie, were you lying then, or are you lying now?
Right. He had probably one of the ones that created the most firestorm. You said something interesting, and I want to, I'm going to reserve my reaction until after John. John, you're going to tell me about your thoughts on mostly the reaction, so to speak.
Well, I think the difference between a year ago and now is that I think a lot of white people are really irritated about what they call the black thing. And it's because of the racial reckoning and how it's gone. And I'm going to make myself unpopular here and say that to an extent, I'm not sticking up for Charlie Kirk, but to an extent, I see what some of them mean, because a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion seminars that have now become de rigueur everywhere instead of something that only some people are required to do, they don't work. And I think that most of them are premised on a vision of race that I think is unnecessarily divisive. Yes, we need to know about racism. We need to know about how these things happen. But a lot of this DEI stuff, the way it's actually done, just promotes hostility in ways that I just don't think are constructive. And I think that the idea that if you are not actively battling racism, you're a racist, or that any imbalance between white and black people is based on something called systemic racism that is white people's fault. In other words, Ibram Kendi, the prominence that he's acquired over the past year. If a white person feels that Ibram Kendi is an empty suit, sorry, they're right. As I have said before, I didn't start saying it until he started attacking me in public, but I figure if he's going to jump me, I'm going to jump him. If he's an empty suit, it doesn't make you a racist to think that. We've had a really tough time over the past year. But I do think this also. On Juneteenth, yeah, ultimately it's symbolism, true. But suppose it hadn't passed. If it hadn't passed, think about how furious all of us would be.
What that would say.
So I think I would rather that it had passed. Although, Shemeka, I understand everything that you're saying. Every single thing you said, I understand. But imagine if it hadn't worked. I think that in some ways we are seeing progress. So those are the two things that I think about that.
Right. And I guess I'm kind of a hybrid of the two because I look at things, like I said before, I always say that I react a little bit differently than most people. And I don't just start typing right away. I kind of listen and see what's happening. And I think the holiday is a good thing. It's cool. I don't have any issue with it. I see why some people think it's divisive because of the things that John said, that the timing that it came, how it came about. But like you, John, I'm not condoning their reactions, but I'm just explaining. I understood it because neither of you really talked about the other reactions that we saw, right? So I don't know if you all saw them all. I saw a lot, and I don't mean 5 or 10, hundreds of black people saying stuff like, that's fine, but who cares? Where's my reparations? So they had a kind of different spin than Shemeka's like, yeah, symbolism, give me something else. Some was saying, reference George Floyd. Others were saying that, these people are just pandering to us. It's disrespectful. So you had some of those. So it wasn't just the right. But you also got, as I heard, the centrists were the most interesting people to me. They were the people saying things like, well, the GOP, kind of like Shemeka said, which is interesting to me. The GOP should have taken this as an opportunity. And so I look at it, no offense, and I get why people think that. But my thought was like, exactly how? Because politicians are going to politic. So they're going to look at this as how it benefits them. It's the reason why they passed it so fast. Nobody on the panel said they disagree with it, but there's a reason it passed so fast. So my point is, if I'm the GOP guy, let's just be fair. Because it passed in the Senate and everybody agreed with it, right? 100%. It was unanimous. Yet none of the Republican senators are getting accolades for it, right? What I saw was that people saying, another thing I saw was, that's why I'm proud to be a liberal. But all the GOP senators signed it too, and most of the Republicans in the House. So as a politician, they're looking at it like, well, what can I get from it, right? Fair, unfair. So I don't get the praise. The Democrats get the praise. If a Ted Cruz said, I thought it was great, I'm in Texas and I signed it because it's great, what was going to happen? If he came out and said that they were going to attack them, shut up, you racist. So he couldn't win there. But the last sprinkle on top for me was ABC's running a special tonight. I don't know if you all saw the ads. It's the Michael Strahan Barack Obama special for Juneteenth, and it's star-studded with all these celebrities. So my point was, to be fair to the GOP, and I am not a Republican, but to be fair, the only people invited were the people who woke and take a knee on the 4th. So to the Charlie Kirk type of thing, which was the worst type of response, but he was like replacing the 4th. Nobody's saying it's replacing the 4th. That is silly. However, the people celebrating it are the people like, I don't celebrate the 4th anyway, right? So there's that piece. And now Obama's going to get to take a victory lap. So like John said, a white person who thinks that Kendi is the empty suit, which is fact, is a racist. Well, I will say, so the conservative or Republican who says, but we did it in like 3 days, but Barack Obama was president for 8 years and it was never passed. And then the evil Nazi authoritarian racist was president for 4 years. That should have been more of a reason to try to push it. Didn't happen. And now it happens in 3 days. So them asking questions with us. So my argument is they couldn't have won. And the best was one person I really like and respect who's a liberal, but we talk all the time. Really honest person who cares. Tweeted, well, they missed the opportunity. They should have just had their own celebration. I'm like, but wait a minute. If it's for everyone, why why should the big event for Juneteenth be Michelle Obama and all the celebrities, and then the Republicans go in the corner and have a little a little sparkler and say, yay. So I don't really think there would have been a way for them to do it. Am I wrong?
Well, you know what I think is this. If the Republicans can do this easily, depending on the circumstance, then I think what we're seeing is this is really just a symbol. And if it's just a symbol, and if people are going to feel real smart by saying this is just a symbol, what about reparations? That there's so many places you can take that. But if it is just a symbol, then we need to reconsider how obsessed we often get about symbols. An awful lot of this racial reckoning has been about how dare you use the word reverse. How dare you make a movie of In the Heights and not have dark-skinned Latinos as some of the stars? How dare you do something very small and simple that supposedly has such larger repercussions for a poor black woman trying to feed her 3 kids? So much of this is about t-shirts and words and symbols and gestures and dance styles as opposed to helping people who need help. And I hate to say, I'm not against Juneteenth, great, but if it doesn't matter, then people need to think about some other things that don't really matter, and we need to get back to real activism as opposed to performance art. That's what I think about the ultimate impact of a lot of this.
Right. And the last thing I want to say about it, and this may be like John doesn't mind saying unpopular things. It's just a thought. It popped in my head and made me think. It's not a push for or against anything. So everybody who knows Juneteenth, for some people this was new. Most of us knew about it. Knew it was kind of a regional thing. People in the South, people in Texas particularly said, "Yeah, I celebrated." Black people in Chicago and New York were like, "What are you talking about?" So my one thing that popped in my head, and it's only because of that and the fact that I recently moved to New York with my son in tow. And I'm like, well, if we're going to start celebrating what has been traditionally regional, state, and local celebrations and holidays, what happens when everybody wants their piece if it's just symbolism? So I moved to New York and I didn't know my kids out of school one day. I'm like, why is he out of school today? And they were out twice. He was out for a Jewish holiday and he was out for a Muslim holiday. No issues with either, but it's a New York thing that they do in New York. Never happened in Chicago. In Chicago, they get Casimir Pulaski Day off because in Chicago they have the highest concentration of Poles in the world outside of Warsaw. But they don't get it off in New York. So if they start saying, well, if they're making that national, I want National Pulaski Day, and then all these groups want national regional holidays, do we ever go to work? That also popped in my head. It was just a thought. I'm like, it's if we're going to make every holiday and put it on the grand stage, there's people who did important things for this country with all types of diverse backgrounds from all over the country. Where do we draw the line and when we stop celebrating them?
And as far as I'm concerned, what we need to think about is one, how many holidays we're going to have, although I'm glad that there's Juneteenth. But I have a really arrogant line in my next book, which is coming out in October, and it's called Woke Racism. And it is questioning a lot of what we're calling benefit to our race since last year. And it's going to make a lot of people mad. And one of the meanest little things I write in that one, and it's the one sentence where I know this makes me feel like an asshole, I'm going to write it anyway, is I say, and I wrote this line in July of 2020, and I knew people are going to be reading this and sometime in the middle of 2021. I said, for a lot of people, they just live for being aggrieved and offended. I meant white people on our behalf as well as black people. I said people live for it. And there is absolutely nothing that could ever happen in this country that would change. I wrote about all these things, Juneteenth being celebrated nationwide last summer. That was weird. I mean, it was great, but it was weird. And all these various things that doing, all these people getting fired for no reason, all these TV shows about how people cook in South Carolina, all these things that are being made for free, all these white voice actors pulling away from doing black characters. All of that stuff had already happened by August of 2020. I said, something revolutionary is going on a certain level. And I said, in about a year, the way I phrased it was, as you read this, take a listen to the usual suspects, take a listen to the usual people, and notice that not a single one of them will admit that any significant change has happened. They're still singing the same songs, still saying the same things, despite all of these seismic changes that have happened. And then I write, I know it will seem hubris for me to write this a year before and just presume that it'll be that way. However, all I ask you to do is look around. And you know what? here we are. So Juneteenth ends up being a national holiday, and the usual people are saying, nope, not enough. It's not meaningful. It's just a symbol. But if it hadn't happened, the same people would be screaming from the rooftops that racism is everything. In
And that's
other
the proof.
words, this is a performance. And I say it's a performance that has nothing to do with helping people who need help. That's why I'm complaining. It's not just that I don't like people who perform.
Right.
It's people are hurting. And yet this is what we call, being people who are keeping the struggle going. I don't get
Right.
it.
Wow, that's a great segue to the article you wrote. I want to talk about. But Shemeka, do you have anything you want to finish on any of that or Juneteenth?
No, I'm hoping that someone I know invites me to a cookout, Hasn't happened yet, but I'm hopeful.
Yeah, right, right. But it's so wonderful that John ended that way, talking about what difference it's going to make, the usual suspects saying the same thing. And I talk a lot about solutions. That's all I really care about. I think most of the time we spend about, well, what did this person do? And what does this do? But okay, what do we do now? White people are racist. I don't say they're not, even though I don't believe so. I mean, I just say, okay, what do you do? Because that's the only way you move on. And when I was reaching out to John, I said, "What do you want to talk about?" He's like, "I don't know. I'm spontaneous, spur of the moment." So I said, "I've been thinking about. I remember you writing this piece about 10 years ago, and it was really interesting. I want to find it." So it was even better because I was wrong because I piece, and it is almost the 20th anniversary of the piece. It was published in City Journal in 2001. 2001, people, and it was called "What's Holding Blacks Back." And I thought it would be great to revisit this now, after a year of all this madness, after we now get to celebrate Juneteenth and the country's no longer racist, and see where we are. And it's funny because at the end of the article, you even talk about, I wonder where we'd be way down the road in 2021. And so, for those of you who haven't read the article, go find it. It's still available online. But it opens with John, and it kind of ties with me to my childhood, which was very similar to his in this respect. And I talk about this in my 1776 article about how we learned true Black history, but we learned. Look, so in the article, John opens talking about how his mom made him watch Roots, and his mom said, "You need to know what happened. Watch at the civil rights era. Watch what happened. Watch the hoses. Watch the bad things that happened. Learn about slavery and learn about this engineer. Learn about Benjamin Banneker. Find out about this. See what we did in spite of." So he got both. Most people didn't get enough of either, or he opens talking about this. And now he walked away thinking, I think you started around 10 years old when she was doing this. So as a teenager, going into your adulthood, you walked away, thinking about the horrors, but a bit triumphant, saying, well, this is good. It shows that we've made progress and things are changing and things are progressing for everyone. Blacks have opportunities. Yay. And then he writes, it's funny, I normally on the show, but I knew I was going to read this paragraph. So, yeah, during the decade, I came to realize that this man out among most Black Americans. In every race-related debate, whether over Rodney King, O.J. Simpson, March, Ebonics, or affirmative action, almost every Black person I knew, many with backgrounds as comfortable as my own, started from the fierce conviction that decades after that Whitey's foot remains pressed upon all Black Americans' necks. For most Black Americans, the rapid of the Black middle class, of interracial relationships and marriages, and of Blacks in prestigious positions has no bearing on Black America. Further, they believe grasp the unmistakable reality of oppression is itself proof of racism, while Blacks are self-deluded. John McWhorter, 2001. What has changed?
What's funny is I'm not as into myself as I think some people think, and I have not read that since then. I honestly, I know
Well,
that
you're
that
right. So
article was that article was a boil down of Losing the Race that the Manhattan Institute City Journal asked. That was the beginning of me writing articles. I believe that was the first media article on race that I wrote. If you call boiling down the book an article, that was the first long form article that I did. And so I don't remember writing that, but that is certainly me, including some of the I would have brought up Benjamin Banneker, etc. And that has not changed a bit, not a bit. And I think it was changing when Barack Obama was elected. And even when I wrote that in 2001, who would have imagined there's going to be a black president in 7 years? But once there was, I felt like there was a sea change. It was hard to look at that and not see something magic. You could pretend that it didn't matter that the president was not black, but God, it showed that something had happened. But then came social media, and I live on social media just like everybody else. But in 2009, that is when it became you're not on Facebook instead of are you on this Facebook? It happened that year. 2009 is when I remember sitting in a room and asking a group of people, what the hell is this Twitter? And everybody laughed because it was at the point where I was behind. Twitter was a thing in 2009. Once you have those two things in particular, and then all the rest of it, it ended up whipping up one, stupid conservatives. That's when the Tea Party starts. Everybody says it was because Barack Obama was black. I think that the Tea Party would have started if John Edwards had become president. It was because of social media. And then also it whipped the sort of Ta-Nehisi Coates wing of things. And I'm not dumping on him, but his popularity was largely stoked by social media. I'm not saying that he didn't deserve it, but I'm not sure that he would have become the icon that he is if it weren't for the power of these tools. And all power to him, but it was because of that that a certain fashion of studied pessimism about race settled in and became a measure of your moral worth, including among a lot of white people. That's when this sort of thing happens with white people.
Mm-hmm.
And so now we're at the point where people are thinking just like they did when I wrote that. It's the exact same thing. I really think things were turning around as we straddled 2010, but by 2014 it was clear that that hadn't been the case. And the last thing I'm saying is that we're not supposed to think about what's wrong. Like there is systemic racism. I wrote about this in a Substack post about a month ago. It's not that I'm saying that there aren't problems. I'm not saying that racism is only Archie Bunker. But the idea that we are always just in the toilet, that we live in this nakedly racist nation, I think it's exaggerated. I think it's counterproductive. And frankly, it hasn't changed. It's at the point where callow 25-year-old me, I'm sure, is thinking of himself now or thinking of herself now as living in a post-civil rights era where things really are much better than one might have expected, and finding out when they go to college that they're not supposed to think that. The exact same thing is certainly happening.
Wow.
And I think it's sad because an awful lot has happened. We've had a black president twice. Juneteenth is now a national holiday. June what? Can you imagine 10 years ago, imagine that happening? What? Juneteenth is a national holiday. So much is happening. And the smart take is that we're supposed to pretend that it didn't. Nothing has changed. And I'm
we don't
sad
focus,
to say that.
and we don't focus on what we can actually control. Shemeka, has anything changed?
Well, they got Aunt Jemima off the syrup bottle.
We can
I
eat
forgot
syrup.
about that.
We can eat syrup again.
Without
And Uncle
feeling
Ben.
depressed.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I didn't read the entire article, but I didn't pay attention to the date. It's so accurate of what's happening now. When you just said 2001, I'm
You're
like,
like, I thought that was Substack.
Right.
Right. Exactly.
Yep. Could
Oh
have
my
written it
God.
down.
You froze, Shemeka. Oh, there we go. Oh, we're losing her.
We have to make Shemeka just say all of that again because it's
Right, because it's so good. But yeah, that's the reason why I thought it was so important is because not a word of it, like she said, she didn't pay attention to the date. Not a word of it has changed. And that's what frustrates me so much. I'm like, that's why my biggest phrase is give the left the argument.
But she knows that
She
what my
doesn't even
grandmother
realize
had
I
to
can't
deal
hear.
with.
She's just going over there. But I don't. That's awesome.
you have got to edit her back in.
Right. But I think that we made great progress, but we could have been so much further along if we focused on the things that we can control. And maybe it's better. Maybe that's
Yeah,
what we need to do. Maybe we need to say, go like superpower might give them their argument. We need to say all of that. What you're saying is true. So now we can't debate anymore. It's all true. All white fragility. All white people are racist. However, we're not going to do what you're going to do because that's not going to work. What we're going to do is insulate and control what we can control, right? And instead of talking about how other people feel and think, we're going to focus on what we can do in our family, what we can do in our community, what we can do in our school, what we can do in local government. Do that for 5 years, shut up, and see what happens. Because the article that you wrote, which is so great, 20 years later that you don't remember, because it went into the next phase. You continue to say that you started to say, well, what is the problem? Because, you know, the article is what's holding blacks back. You just talked about how they reacted differently from you. And you said that their convictions rest that, you know, everything is so bad for blacks on 7 articles of faith, carefully passed from person to person at all levels of the black community. Their beliefs, rather than what remains of racism itself, are the biggest obstacles to further black progress in today's America. And all are either outright myths or severe distortions of truth. They are 1 through 7. Most black people are poor. I wrote about that in my white wokeness article for City Journal. Black people earn 61% of what whites do. An epidemic of racist church burnings. The CIA created the inner city by pumping drugs into them. Because black men are disproportionately incarcerated, racism reigns eternal. Racial profiling is racism, and excessive police brutality against blacks shows that racism reigns eternal. Again, not one has changed.
I remember some of them don't get talked about as much. It used to be that, you know, very quick in the conversation would be the church burnings.
Yeah.
I don't know whether people realized that wasn't true or whether it just stopped happening as much, but that used to come up a lot. And then also standard was that CIA.
Yeah.
People really did think back then that the CIA had somehow pumped drugs into what would have been about 150 American cities, and that's how the crack epidemic happened. Luckily, that idea faded away. But the police thing is huge. And here, no, you think people are still?
I don't think so. Shemeka, do you think that's faded away? That the CIA created the inner city by pumping drugs into it?
No, it hasn't faded.
Not even close.
So people are still talking about that.
I would say close to 50%. I'd say 50 plus 1.
Yes.
That was, yeah.
They just don't talk about it out loud. It stays in the black community, but I hear it all the time. And they don't know. And the thing about it is history. They don't know that Nixon was crazy and he recorded all his conversations, and that the Congressional Black Caucus went to him and said, "You need to do something about this drug in our community, and if you don't do something about it, we're going to call you a racist."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a story that just still isn't told. And then there's the cop issue, and I say these days the cops can be racist against black people. The cops are meaner to us. They're meaner to us than to others. I don't think that the cops kill us out of racism. I don't think that the statistics show that that's what goes on. But, you know, back then, I just saw no reason to go against that. It certainly looks like it. And so I said back, I don't remember. I'm sorry I didn't read the article. I don't remember whether I got
No, it's better. I like you recalling.
If they didn't cut it from the article or something, I would have said the cops is still a problem, but it's like a house that burns down and the chimney is the last thing remaining. It doesn't mean that the house didn't burn down. There's that last problem, which is the cops. And these days, I think the cops is less of a problem than I did then, because I don't think, this is what you're not supposed to say. I don't think George Floyd died because he was black. I think George Floyd died because Derek Chauvin is a terrible human being. And they're white George Floyds. But the cops rough us up more. They single us out for drugs. All of that is real. But I still say the house burns down, the chimney stays up because it's made out of stone. That doesn't mean the house didn't burn down. A lot of people insist on saying the house never burned down. That's the problem.
Well, one thing I'll say about the police thing, though, is, again, giving them their argument, I think we're arguing the wrong thing. So, again, I go back to, do you really want to fix it? Because if you truly wanted to fix the problems in policing, you would separate police shootings from police brutality. Because they're different, they're both bad, they're both wrong, they're different, and one's way more prevalent than the other. So I think police have, one, the race thing, yes, they do it to blacks more. I'm not discounting that at all. But I also think some people go into law enforcement, because I know a lot of my friends are cops, because they were bullies. So some guys are just jerks anyway. They bully the neighborhood. You know, if you go to, rural white areas, I mean, you think like because they're all white, they can't tell the difference. The cop harass a certain type of white more than the other. It's still wrong, but we could fix that a little bit. I mean, it's human nature. You can't totally eliminate it, but you can fix it if we focused on it, and you got poor whites and poor blacks and middle class people to say that's wrong. We have to find a better way to police. Then you can fix it. But if we keep saying shooting, they're killing us. When you have celebrities, I keep saying it every other week because it's so silly. We have LeBron saying they're hunting us down, and his work schedule is posted on the internet. It's foolish. So if we actually wanted to fix the problem, which I don't believe we do, because if we did, we would say, what is it about the fact that, forget about the shootings. Yeah, I know it's hard to say. We say, forget about the shootings. I'm not even going to focus on that. What is it about a cop that makes him punch a black guy more than he does a white guy, or slam him to the ground, or X, Y, Z, and then you can get somewhere, right? And you can pull, I mean, we got FOIA requests, we got more information, we got the internet. You can nail that down and get down to a granular level. But you can't do that if you're just talking about, well, that guy got shot. So I think we're approaching it the wrong way. But most of your myths, just like the other problem, are still effective today. It's 20 years later. We need to talk about how we can fix it. But Shemeka's back, and we really wanted to hear what you said, and you went out. You were talking about whether things have changed from then to now. You said no, you didn't even recognize the date, and go.
Ugh, cannot even remember.
And John said you have to do it verbatim.
Yes. So, no, I was saying that, we do, I think, kind of just dwell on the past a lot in the Black community. My daughter's getting ready to go to college, and she's going to a HBCU, and I'm so worried that everything that I've taught her, that she's not a victim, that she's not oppressed, they're going to try to reverse that when she goes into school, because that's all that we hear a lot in the Black community. And my thing is, of course, racism is not completely gone, but it's not what my grandmother had to deal with. And I never raised my children in thinking, oh, the same things that your great grandmother had to deal with, you're having to deal with now. That's silly. And I don't like when people actually push that. And that's one of the things that I don't like about the Black community. It's like if you're always looking for something wrong, you're going to find it. And, so yeah, I do think that a lot has stayed the same, whereas people are always looking to be offended, and people are always looking for racism in every single thing, and it's not in every single thing. We have progressed, we have come a long way, and if we don't start to focus on that, then that's what's going to keep the division and the anger and the bitterness that we have, because things have changed. We have, I don't want to keep singing "We shall overcome." I've overcome a lot, I think we have. And so,
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you say it's not racism in everything, which is an obvious fact, but you can find it in everything if you look for it, which is part of the problem. And as we talk about move to solutions, the other issue is, what are you doing if you're focusing on that? So John talked about the policing and how when he wrote that, he's thinking he felt this, and now he thinks he went more one way. It'd be interesting to see if you changed a little bit on one of the points. But when I talk about solutions, I think education is the key. It's also because it's so important, and it's the one thing that most people can agree on. So I often wonder why we all know that education is the best way to get forward, even in a racist America, because I gave them their argument. So America is a racist country. So America is a racist country, but even in the racist country, you can succeed if you get educated. But we don't put as much emphasis in education. When we do talk education as a community, we talk about how it's unfair and how they don't put enough money in our community as they do that community, and how our teachers are this and this is that. We do it in a sense of blame. We don't do it in a sense of education is important. How can we fix it? How can we make it better? And I think that's the way to do it. I often ask people, John, I'll ask you, Shemeka's heard me say this before, think of all the Black people you know. Think of all the ones that have letters behind their names, the doctors, the accountants, the engineers and such. How many of them are unemployed? Because if the answer is zero or close to zero, my question would be, in spite of racism, can't we solve the crime problem and all the other problems, the criminal justice unfairness and that and the like, by simply making more scientists, doctors, engineers, and such?
I would also add this. We have to think in almost a sci-fi kind of way. If you think about the typical black academic outside of the sciences, the black person who does social science, for example, their specialty on some level is racism.
Yeah.
What they study is what holds us back, and they'll apply statistics to it. They'll tell you that, if you're somebody who thinks like us, you're wrong because you don't know what a chi-square is, et cetera. Statistics prove that we just can't do anything. So almost every black academic in the social sciences, not to mention almost every black journalist, is a blackologist. They're a racism specialist. Why? Why is it that there aren't a representative number of PhDs whose specialty is how we can overcome, whose specialty is black success, applying statistics to that, demonstrating to the rest of us how you get past racism? There's no reason that that's not the case other than fashion. And so, yeah, Charles, we're talking about solutions. How do you make the best of what's always going to be an imperfect world? There is a sense, talk about HBCUs, that if you get a PhD in blackness, you have to get a PhD in professional pessimism. That's wrong. That is a real problem with our times that nobody would have understood even 50 years ago. And it's just got to.
Right. Now, the one thing I was going to say, I wanted to see what your thoughts were 20 years removed. You did say that, and it is still a problem, but you said that I think you wrote that it's the prime reason many blacks fail, being charged with acting white. What are your thoughts on that 20 years later?
I have thoughts on that. I think that's so interesting because I haven't heard as much about that over the past 10 years. And it's partly been because over the past 10 years, I've had kids of my own and have been busier. I haven't followed the literature on that. I suspect that that is not as much of a problem now, though, as it was when I wrote. It stunned me when I wrote about it in the year 2000, how many people told me that I was making it up. It was,
Wow.
frankly, it was just shameful. People calling themselves speaking up for the black community and telling me that the idea that that was real had been. And even today, there's some black journalists who I'm not going to name because I don't want to do too much ad hominem, but really respectable people who write about that having happened to them. I'm thinking about one in particular who argues it away, that it wasn't about white, it was about the kind of clothes I wore, something like that.
Right,
when I can frankly tell, Jamel Bowie, it happened to you. Admit it. But he won't admit
No
it.
names, though. No names.
It's no names, though. No names at all.
Protect
And
the
the thing is, it was real. The evidence was absolutely crushing that was a major factor in black scholastic problem in the late 20th century and into the 21st. Maybe it isn't now. And if it isn't now, and I am going to get around to looking at this, if it's changed, I want to know why. Because if it's changed, that's a good thing. And it would be nice if we could replicate whatever it was that changed it. I suspect Barack Obama's just being himself had a little something to do with it. Can't say that for sure.
Right. But
So,
the problem
yeah.
would be if it changed. If the problem would be if it changed, that is a good thing. But then they're still failing. So
And that's the thing. I think even if it isn't about a teenager being told you just think you're white for liking school, I do think it's partly what we've been talking about before. There's a kind of a disconnect that one ends up feeling between really concentrating on academic work that isn't about victimhood, out of a sense that you're stepping away from your race, that isn't what we do to just crunch the numbers for no particular reason. It's an issue of identity. It's not something conscious. It's not something parents tell their kids. But it's definitely there, and it doesn't help when you have people running around saying we need to come up with a black physics that isn't about the numbers. So I've listened to this time. I'm not going to use the name. A prominent black writer, thinker, podcaster who stands up in front of white audiences and says that it's not fair to expect black scholars to use numbers. You have to take our perspective in if you don't want to be a racist.
Right.
And says this at an elite university, and all the white people pretend to agree. Disgusting. And that ends up creating scholastic inferiority. Just that sense that it's not what we do, to be precise. But the whole you just think white, maybe that's evaporating. I hope it is. That's the thing. I hope that's gone. But I don't know at this point.
Right. And then I want to close your article, but you said something interesting. You said that a lot of these black academics study blackness, and it becomes a situation where then they have to keep it up in order to get paid. You didn't mention that, right? Obviously, but one thing I think it was, I guess I have to say a name. Are we saying names? I think Kendi said what the struggles he has. He mentioned that he had to struggle getting his message to the regular black community, and it's because they're not as educated, so they haven't read the book, so they don't understand. But they're black, and if you're saying it's omnipresent and it's ubiquitous, then they know the situation because they're black. So why do they have to read the books? It just seems farcical to me. But 20 years later, you close the article by saying perhaps 20 years from now, mainstream black thought will join me in stressing individual initiative and integration. And perhaps the national media will get on the bandwagon too. Today, when I'm interviewed on TV or in the paper, a disparaging comment from some black leftist inevitably is part of the story. Though, when a Derek Bell or a June Jordan is interviewed, never do reporters feel the need to bring in Shelby Steele or Walter Williams for their alternative viewpoint. Let's hope that in 2021, the networks won't feel that any talk of black personal responsibility needs to be balanced by victimology.
Wow. And I really said 20 years.
That's what you said. You put 2021. That's why I thought this was a great article to revisit. And you're right. Your hope has fizzled, by the way, because it ain't going to happen. In fact, they're going to go in the other direction, John. I got a feeling, let me predict, that by 2021, the media will be worse. No, it's just crazy. But I mean, I thought it was a great article. People should go read it. It's on City Journal. It's called What's Holding Us Back. Any last thoughts from you two about that?
That's so interesting.
I'm blowing him away with his own words.
There is there is a difference in that nowadays I don't feel like the New York Times or NPR and the other places feel the need to drag in a June Jordan. Now it would be Nicole Hannah-Jones or something like that.
Right.
When someone like me or someone like you or someone like Glenn Lowry says something, not as much. Part of it for me is that I've learned how to talk. I've learned how to anticipate the sorts of things that make them bring June Jordan in. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that there's more media that is friendly to people who are quote unquote conservative, given that I'm such a right-wing Republican.
Right.
But there are more places. But no, that's in general, there is the idea that Ibram Kendi and Nicole Hannah-Jones are correct, and people like us have some explaining to do. It's not as bad as it was back then. I think that you're making me think the discussion has become a little bit more sophisticated. But still, the people who are considered unassailable are them, as opposed to us. We're different, we're contrarians, etc.
Right. Yeah. We have to prove ourselves, and they don't. That's part of it too. You can't question a black person. It's their lived experience. But I'm black, and you're questioning me. Yeah. Well, that's not your lived experience. You probably don't even know black people.
Never knew any. No.
Right. Shemeka, anything?
Yeah, that's the funny part because you're conservative, let's assume that you don't know any black people. And so it's always funny to me because, they'll try to come, and I'm like, that's really all I know or all I knew, through college, so it's silly. But I'm glad that they're getting to see a different side. I don't know if I ever thought that someone was acting, and I've been thinking about that. I did think they were acting like they went to the county schools. So
you said that before.
There's either you went to the city schools or the county schools, and the county school people different.
Different, not white, different.
Right.
Different.
So I know John's got to go soon, but I want to give you a chance to talk about, tell us about your podcast and other stuff you're working on, but quickly talk about your latest book. You're going to have like 4 this year. It's insane. 9 Nasty Words. Please don't just buy this book. I was telling John, he hasn't heard it. You have to get the audio book because this man, a linguist, saying naughty things in voices. Chapter 3, absolutely hilarious. John, tell us what else you got going on.
Well, there's 9 Nasty Words. There is woke racism, how a new religion is betraying Black America. That's coming in October. I do a podcast that's about just jolly linguistics issues called Lexicon Valley. That is currently with Slate, but I'm moving it to Substack in about 10 minutes, so you can follow it there. And then also, I write a newsletter for Substack where, frankly, I'm quite unfiltered. The nice thing about Substack is that although I also write for The Atlantic, with Substack, it's exactly what I wanted to say, when I wanted to say it, how I wanted to say it. And so I don't pull any punches. And so if you want what I really think, then go to Substack. The Atlantic, it's what I really think. It's with people filtering me and pulling me
Right.
back from going too far, and which is fine. One should learn to be submitted to editing, but sometimes it's nice to not be edited at all. And Substack is just me doing it. And so follow me there, whether you want to pay for it or not. Just that is, if you want to know what I think, that is somewhere to look for me.
To do this look back to 20 years, I think is you're an important voice, and you know
Good
have
idea.
some unique things to say. Maybe you'll read it next time and think about it and put out something else to kind of
You have me
freshen it up or
curious.
something.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's right.
And I definitely appreciate you coming on. I hope you'll come back. Come on the Charles Love Show. Other stuff. And I wish Will was here. Miss him. And Shemeka, you got anything you want to leave us with as
No, I just need Will to make sure that he's here every day. I like to be the woman that like
have to
comes
work too
in
much.
with the hors d'oeuvres. Yeah. I like to come in while the men are speaking with my little, would you like a drink? Would you like a mint?
I
didn't say it. I didn't say it. I did not say it.
it's all
Yeah, only you said that.
Thank you again, John.
thank you. I think John. Thanks, Shemeka. Thank you all for watching and listening to Cut the Bull this week. Stick with us and check us out next week.
I'm saving the day, I'm saving the day. I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and the home of the brave.